Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookishrealm and I'm back with another video. It is raining pretty hard here. I did not even know that it was supposed to rain today. I didn't think it was supposed to rain all week. I thought we were just getting a temperature drop, but apparently it's raining. So if my mic is able to pick up the rain, I hope it's a nice like ambiance type of feeling in the background, which is pretty cool. And it's raining really, really hard. Okay. Did not expect that, but that's okay. We're gonna go with it. Okay, so as you can see from the title of this video, I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about this topic. A lot of things that I've been doing on this channel lately have been discussion-based stuff about the community, stuff about work that I do in terms of librarianship, but there's something that I've always wanted to talk about that I haven't really gotten the opportunity to talk about, and it's in regard to a comment that I often hear within our community is that booktubers seem to be reading the same books all the time. Every time people watch book hauls or they watch wrap-ups, we all seem to be reading the same books. And I wanted to dissect that comment a little bit. Of course, as I always say, whenever we have these conversations, I want everyone to engage, whether you feel this way, whether you agree with that statement, whether you disagree with that statement, whether you kind of like feel 50-50, which is where I'm kind of at in regard to that statement, but I thought we could just talk about that a little bit. So this is not a statement that is new or just happened this year or last year. That has been a comment that has been made since I've been on Booktube, and I've been on Booktube for an extremely long period of time. And I used to actually make this comment myself as well. And I think that there is some truth to this comment. So Booktube in itself is a large community, but it's also a small community. And I know that's probably like, Ashley, how's it large and small? I think in the grand scheme of like the reading world at large, Booktube is small, but within our own perception of our community, we are rather large. Like there are booktubers out there that I've never heard of before. There are big booktubers out there that I've never heard of before. And that just is because we are a global community and we just have a lot more people than I think we take into consideration. So what ends up happening is I think that usually there are certain books, certain authors, or certain new releases that get a lot of hype on Booktube. And there's nothing wrong with hype. I don't know if people consider like the term hyped books to be like a negative word, but I don't think it's a negative word. I think it's reality. There are certain books out there that get a lot more buzz and are pushed a lot more depending upon, the author or if it's part of a series or whatever the case may be. So what ends up happening is that you have certain titles, certain authors who get a lot of hype. There are a lot of popular individuals out there. I mean, y'all know the household names. I'm not going to even go into that. So when they release books, it feels like everybody is reading the same book. It really does. And I'm going to use an example. When Sarah J. Maas released her new book, the last one in the court or whatever, I can't remember the title. I think I have the copy somewhere. I don't know. When that was released, my feed literally was a reading vlog for that book. And I kept it honest with my friends who were reading that book. This is prior to a lot of discussions that have been happening about where Sarah J. Maas stands on a lot of things that are happening around the world right now, particularly between Palestine and Israel. Prior to this, I was telling them I just don't care enough to even watch it. So I'm not going to watch it. And it wasn't necessarily anything against them. It just was the entire week it was nothing but those reading vlogs. And when stuff like that happens, I do think it feels like everybody's reading the same book, and it can get a little frustrating, I think, from the viewer perspective, where if you're looking for new content, sometimes it can be difficult if we're all reading the same like new releases and we're all engaging in the same quote unquote hype books. I do get the frustration. And I do understand why people are like, man, like booktubers are all hauling and reading the same books and there's nothing new out there. There's nobody who's really doing anything. But here's the thing where I kind of like challenge that perspective. I think that part of what you see in your feed is all dependent upon who you follow. Because I follow some really, really great booktubers who read things that I have never heard of, and I work in a library, and I mean, that doesn't mean that because I work in a library I know every single book that's ever been published, but there are some things that people make references to that I've never heard of. A lot of international booktubers bring books to the table, to the forefront, that we probably wouldn't hear a lot about, because I think that the publishing industry is very American centric, like North America particularly. So there's a lot of things that are happening out there that we don't necessarily know about. So I think that when that statement is made, while there can be validity to that statement, I also think that on the other end of the spectrum, you have to consider who is in your sub box. Because if you are following individuals who all kind of read along the same vein, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's going to be books, I think, that as a community, we probably all are going to touch on at some point. It's a possibility. Like I said, the booktube community is large, but also feels very small at the same time. But I also like to challenge people to say, like, if you're following a lot of people who have exactly the same reading taste, you're going to see the same content in terms of like hauling and wrap-ups and what they've been reading. You're going to see a lot of that same content because they probably have similar reading tastes, and also people have a tendency to read what they feel comfortable reading. I like to challenge myself sometimes, but I also do fall into that habit. I'm not exempt from reading things that are in my comfort zone that I know probably 9 times out of 10 it's A, gonna be easy for me to make it through, or B, I'm 9 times out of 10 probably going to enjoy it. So you can get stuck in that routine of, this is what I'm comfortable reading, so this is what I pick up, which then presents that cyclical issue of seeing the same stuff over and over and over and over again. So I think it's like a multifaceted thing that we really do have going on when we look at that particular statement from a variety of different angles. I think that you have people who have similar reading tastes, you have books that just have a lot of buzz going on, you have viewers who may be following people that have similar reading tastes, and then, you know, I don't always like to put that on the viewer too, because YouTube's algorithm is funny and it's constantly changing, and it's not something, it's AI. It's kind of hard to beat the algorithm. So it's one of those things where sometimes YouTube itself will continuously push the same people over and over and over again, so then you just keep getting similar content, and then that's when you end up in situations where people are just reading the same things over and over and over again. And then that's why I enjoy people who do stuff like booktuber shoutouts. I think I definitely should do one, because I feel like I follow a good amount of content creators that are reading things that are extremely different than what I typically see within the community. But those videos are the videos that are extremely helpful, where you can find new content creators that are not necessarily reading the same things as everyone else. And so it's like I said, it's a multifaceted thing. There's so many different elements that you can throw into this statement and throw into why it seems like we all read the same thing, when in actuality I don't think that a lot of us do. But when you throw the YouTube algorithm in there, those who are not kind of reading, and to be honest, just being transparent here, I think that Booktube is a very Western YA centric type of community. You see a lot of shine with individuals that are from the Western world who read a lot of YA books. Those of us who read a little bit outside of that don't really get as much push. I think the only person that I know that gets a lot of traction reading different stuff is Gavin. Gavin reads a lot of middle grade. That is definitely his area of expertise. Gavin reads a little bit of everything, but he is an expert in middle grade. But for the most part, from my knowledge outside of that, I don't know too many people who have a decent following or the algorithm is really working in their favor when they're not reading a lot of YA. There are people out there who read a lot of great nonfiction. Like I follow Olive from a Book Olive, who is amazing when it comes to nonfiction recommendations, literary fiction. Like definitely a lot of things that I see that Olive reads, I do not see a lot of other people on Booktube reading. You know, I noticed that there's not a lot of Booktubers who read picture books a lot of times, and that is a whole different discussion. That's a whole different discussion. There aren't a lot of Booktubers that read comics and graphic novels. I'm one of the few who does, and when I do put that content out there, people just don't typically watch it. I know that like Shay, Izzy, and Tamika, they all read a lot of manga. They're part of the Booktube community, but they read a lot of manga, and they're not part of the MangaTube community directly. And their manga content, it can vary on whether people, you know, choose to watch that content or not. So another thing that I think is interesting about this is that I feel like a lot of times people ask for different content. People want something outside of that YA content, or they express that they want something outside of that YA content. But then when that content is put out there, it's kind of hard from a creator perspective because people don't watch that content. And we keep putting that content out there, I think, because it's something that we're passionate about. It's something that we enjoy doing. So like me, for example, I'm very, very passionate about comics and graphic novels, and I've been doing, we're going to get back to it. Shay has been extremely patient with me, but you know, Shay and I were doing the project where we were recommending comics, graphic novels, and manga, or sometimes I'll just do a random, you know, if you like this, then read this. If you know, if you want to get into comics, I've done a live stream related to comics, and I know that that content is not content that's going to get the normal views that I get from my traditionally like book related stuff or my like discussion videos, but that's the content that I like I like talking about comics and graphic novels, and I know that a lot of people on Booktube don't do it. So it can be a very interesting conversation to have, because I think that viewers want it, but I think sometimes that creators don't feel like viewers truly want it if the views don't translate. And that's not to say that Booktubers are in it for the views, but that's kind of how you gauge whether people are interested in certain content or not. And sometimes you just ignore whether people are truly interested in it, and it's just like, well, I'm just passionate about it, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. But it's kind of, it can be discouraging, and that's being transparent and completely honest. It can be discouraging to say, okay, well, I'm going to bring something different to the table as a booktuber, and then people are like, I'm not going to watch that content. So then you end up feeling like you have to make the same content as everyone else in terms of what you're reading, so your views translate correctly, which it stinks. It's not a fun situation to be in, because it's like you don't want to come across as if you're chasing for views, but if you're putting content out there, you want someone to watch it. And it's a very, very tough balance to navigate. It's very hard to want to do something and then know that maybe people are just not going to be interested, and then you're like, well, you say that you don't want to continue to watch people read the same things over and over again, but then when content is put out there, no one is really watching it anyway. So I think from a creator perspective, it can kind of be, it can kind of be awkward. And I think too, when it comes to booktubers reading the same thing, I think us as a community, we kind of have to attempt to step outside of our comfort zones as a whole. I think we are very comfortable in reading YA. As a community, this is not everybody. There are a lot of booktubers out there who read a mix of YA and other stuff. There are booktubers out there who just don't read YA at all. They read what they want to read. But I think when I look at booktube sometimes as a whole, it's that comfort of reading YA. YA stuff gets a lot of buzz. I think there are some other like more adult age categorizations in terms of genres that are getting a little bit more buzz now. Like, I think that thrillers are starting to get a little bit more buzz. I think that romance has always been there, and I think that we've always had romance booktubers like Jess, but I don't think they were ever really getting a lot of the respect that they should be getting, and I think that's still kind of an issue. They grow slower than your average booktubers, so it's almost like if you choose to read anything outside of YA, you're just not gonna be as successful. And once again, that goes back to figuring out that balance between wanting to feel some level of success and wanting to do this because this is what you want to do. You don't care who views it. But when you put a lot of work and effort into creating videos, editing them, and coming up with content, you know, you want people to watch it. It's human nature, and I don't care what anybody says. Like, it's a natural feeling, and it's okay to feel that way. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that outside of YA, it can be kind of hard for some people. There are others who have made it successful by, you know, whether that's reading horror, whether that's reading thrillers, whatever the case may be. But I think that we started, this community, Booktube as a whole, started with YA, and I think that that is its comfort zone, is YA. And when you kind of push those boundaries and you say, okay, you know, I don't see anything wrong with YA. Like, I definitely don't see anything. I read a lot of YA now. I am a lot more than I think I have in the past month. But I think that, you know, when you push those boundaries a little bit, or when you try to get out of that comfort zone, sometimes it doesn't work out, I think, the way that you anticipate it working out. So it's a lot of truth to that statement, and I think there's a lot of underlying factors to consider when you make that statement. And I always say you, I'm not saying like you as a viewer, but just in general, because I've made that statement too. It's like, all y'all read the same thing. Everybody's reading the same books, and it does happen. Sometimes it does happen. I think, like I said before, it depends on who's in your sub box, but YouTube does not help with that. YouTube does not help you find new creators, which is why I think it's so important for us as creators to highlight other creators, to boost other creators, because there are people out there who are doing things that are different, that are not really being picked up on because the algorithm at this moment is not favoring them. And like I said before, fighting against an algorithm, which is nothing but artificial intelligence, is very difficult. It is very difficult. There's days when the algorithm eats you up, and then there's days when the algorithm forgets that you even exist. So it's such a difficult thing on the creator end of being a part of this. But I really want to know, like, a couple of things. Like, do you feel like Booktube should broaden its horizons, or do you feel like Booktube has already? And maybe, you know, I maybe kind of have a dated view. Now, I personally, like I said before, my sub box is full of people who don't necessarily read YA. They dibble and dab in YA, but they read across the spectrum in age categorizations. They read across the spectrum in genre. So I also don't follow a lot of people who have similar tastes to each other, if that makes sense. They may have a couple of things in common, but they all have their niche areas that they absolutely love and enjoy. And that's how I get a broad perspective of what's currently on the market, if that makes sense. So, you know, maybe maybe my view is saying like YouTube just needs to kind of, or Booktube, not YouTube, Booktube should broaden its horizons to a certain degree. That could be a dated perspective. You could tell me it's dated. You know what I always say, like, I have no problem engaging in, you know, like, actually I disagree with you. That's perfectly fine. Do you also feel like it's a balance of different things? Do you feel like it's solely up to the creator to broaden their horizons? Do you think that it's up to the viewer to kind of work to change what they see in their sub box? Do you feel like the algorithm plays a role? Because everything that I've just said is just my perspective, and I'm one person, and also I come from the perspective of a creator, so I don't know what people feel just as viewers. Like, you know, you could be a viewer and be like, actually, I see this completely different. I don't necessarily agree, but this is what I see as a viewer. Because as a creator, I find it very interesting, because there are hundreds of creators out there that I don't know, but I typically do not follow people who read exclusively YA. I don't, or the majority of what they read is YA. I just don't, because that's, for me, that's where the redundancy comes in. That's where I start to find people who kind of read the same books over and over and over and over and over again. And it's nothing against them, but I want to know something that's different. So I'm going to be more familiar with the YA titles that are out there, probably 9 times out of 10 just because of my job alone. But I want to follow people who read genres that I'm not as comfortable with, and I want to follow people who maybe, you know, just touch on things that I didn't even know existed, translated works, people who read, you know, science fiction and fantasy, like stuff like that, where I'm like, you know, like I'm very much into and admire those people. I just like watching them because it's not a genre that I am 100% confident in, especially when we're talking about like the adult categorization. And, you know, once again, even going back to that, there's like subgroups within YouTube. So you have romance booktubers, you have SFF booktubers, like you have people who just strictly read literary fiction, you have people who read strictly, you know, nonfiction, you have people who are a mix of everything. So, but do y'all as viewers, do you know that these people exist? Because I know that these people exist, but I've also had so many years to follow people, and there's certain things that I may do to actively search for these people, and I don't typically follow who everybody else is following because of the fact that I feel like we end up in situations where people are reading the same thing over and over. And that's not a judgment. I should probably have prefaced that by saying it's not a judgment on people who read exclusively YA. There's nothing wrong with that. I think a book is a book is a book is a book. What you read is what you read. What you love is what you love. But I think for me is that I start to withdraw, or I have found in the past that I have started to withdraw from the community when I feel like people are kind of like reading the same books. Like every time I go to a wrap up, everybody's read the same books, and it's like, okay, give me something new. Like I want something that I've never heard of before. And you know, that could just be me. That's just how I've kind of, my experience has been over the past like 7 years now. It's been a very, very long time for me to have been a part of this community, but I just want y'all's takes and perspectives, because like I said, I'm one person. I'm coming from a creator's perspective. I'm coming from someone who's been in the community for a very long time. It may not have a more current kind of view of what's going on in the community right now. It could be a lot more like broad in terms of people pushing boundaries of what they read nowadays. So definitely, you know, let me know whether I'm stuck in a comfort zone. Maybe I am so used to doing certain things because of how Booktube has been in the past that maybe I need to kind of change up my perspective. But anyway, just another thing to think about, another discussion video to kind of, you know, get those wheels turning in your head. As always, let's talk in the comments below. Let's chat it up. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to support this channel, to follow me on social media, all those links will be down in the description box below. And I'll be back with another video soon.